Good evening, everyone. Oh, what an attentive audience and what a beautiful audience. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the beautiful Sheldon Theater in Red Wing. We are so glad you're here. My name is Kelly Gordon. I am a producer with Kerri Miller on all things books at Minnesota Public Radio, including the weekly book show, Big Books and Bold Ideas, which you can hear every Friday at 11, and of course, Talking Volumes. We are so glad that you are here tonight for this special edition of Talking Volumes, the third time that we've done this outside of the Twin Cities metro area. And in fact, our 25th season of Talking Volumes is coming this fall. I have seen a sneak peek of our list. We haven't announced it yet. It'll be coming soon. So we have 5 wonderful authors that are going to be coming to the Fitzgerald Theater. We have some great things planned to celebrate. So as we say in the biz, stay tuned. Before we get started, of course, we'd like to thank our sponsors who really support so much book coverage at Minnesota Public Radio and make Talking Volumes possible. The Duff Endowment, Lunds and Byerly's, and Great River Greening. Their support of all things books means so much to us. And we'd also like to thank our partners. Yes, thank them. They're here. I know Duff is here. And of course, our partner in all of this is the Star Tribune. So I have Trey Muse. Come on out, Trey. He's from Rochester, Star Tribune reporter, to talk a little bit about what's happening at the Star Tribune right now.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Yes, my name is Trey Muse. I am the Rochester correspondent for the Star Tribune. We are, of course, very grateful to be able to partner with Minnesota Public Radio on this wonderful series. The Star Tribune is currently going through a big reimagining of how we serve Minnesota, and so you should look for some exciting things happening with the Star Tribune later on this year. I know in my neck of the woods in southeast Minnesota, the news never seems to stop. There's a lot of things going on, so much so we're actually hiring another correspondent to come work with me down in Rochester. There are, like I said, plenty of stories to cover, from the ongoing nitrate pollution issue in southeast Minnesota to the way Rochester is going to adapt to Mayo Clinic's $5 billion expansion and what that will mean for the rest of the region, including Red Wing. And of course, not to mention Red Wing's recent efforts to come together with the Prairie Island Indian community and learn a little bit more from each other, which is a very exciting story and something that we hope to have a little bit more on coming soon. So once again, thank you so much. And of course, we are excited to be here at Talking Volumes.
Thank you, Trey. We can give it back to him, I think. And we are so glad that you're here for Leif Enger, a great fan favorite and a favorite of ours as well. But first, I would like to introduce you to your host for the evening, Kerri Miller.
Hey, everybody. Nice to have you here. Thank you for coming. I'm Kerri Miller. Welcome to a special Summertime Talking Volumes in Red Wing. And just for the tape, we're at the Sheldon Theater, and it's a pleasure to see you all here. In early April, I took a group of book lovers to Cuba. At the end of the trip, we were in this funky little bookstore in Havana run by this very unusual woman, and we were perusing the shelves when one of our travelers reached up and drew Leif Enger's Peace Like a River off the shelf. Said I, "Don't tell me you've never read that book." Said she, "I've never read this book." Said I, "And you had to come all the way to Cuba to find it." In Leif's new book, I Cheerfully Refuse, our narrator quotes the wisdom of his late wife, Lark, who says, "The best futures are unforeseen." Could Leif have foreseen the winding, wonderful road that would bring him here tonight? We'll talk about that and so much more. Please welcome Leif Enger to the stage of the Sheldon Theater. And there it was, on the shelf in Havana, Cuba.
Amazing.
I know.
Yeah, I
Where's
love that story.
Where's the weirdest place that you have found one of your books?
I found a copy of Peace Like a River in a garage. Where were we? Robin, where were we? My wife Robin is here tonight. We were
Sitting
we were
right
in a
next to my husband, I think.
We were in a small town in I want to say North Dakota.
Okay.
And we stopped. There was some sort of a sale, a garage sale. I don't know why we pulled over. Maybe there was a canoe. If there's a garage sale with a canoe, I always pull over. And because I always want to buy every canoe that I see. There was probably a canoe in the yard, and we stopped, and there was a copy of my book in the garage.
For sale, or?
Yeah, oh yeah, on 20 cents. 20.
What does one think when one sees one's breakout novel on sale for 20 cents?
You think I've made it.
Why? Why do you think that?
Well, look, if you are infiltrating garages, then you're everywhere else.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's the weirdest place, huh? We'll put Havana, Cuba.
That's pretty good. That's
right.
pretty good. Yeah, I'm pleased that somebody went all the way to Cuba and found it.
I
Oh,
know.
cool. Yeah.
And she's loving it, I know. This has been, as noted, this has been a long and winding road to our conversation tonight, and I hope many more, who knows. When Peace Like a River broke out, I want to know how disorienting that was.
Oh, what a great question. When that book sold to Grove Atlantic, I had been working on it for a number of years, but slowly getting up early in the morning and writing for an hour or two, and then going off to my real job at Minnesota Public Radio, where I reported for a long time, and I just didn't see. I had no way of knowing what would happen. My brother Len, 5 years older than me, and I had collaborated on a series of mystery novels.
Right.
And we published those from 1991 to 95, I think, for Pocket Books. They were paperback originals, and they were about an amateur detective named Gunn Peterson. And nobody really bought those novels. I mean, we loved them, and I still think they were kind of good. But they didn't really gain much of an audience, and so Lynn and I, we stopped writing them. I remember the day we decided to quit, I said, I think we're getting out of this just in time. And he said, I think we're getting out of it about 2 years too late. But then Peace Like a River sold, and I thought, well, I'll take a few weeks off, and I'll go back to reporting in a matter of a month or two. And then it just, I don't know, it took off. It sold a lot of copies. It made a lot of friends, and I guess the part that was disorienting was, getting phone calls from people I didn't know, and it kind of scared me, actually.
Yeah, tell me more.
Yeah, we got a call one night from a guy who had heavily accented English, and it turned out he was in Rome. And I still don't really know what he wanted. But I just thought, we have to unlist our phone number now, because people from across the world are reaching out. It was very strange. I liked it. I mean, it was fun. People thinking that you're something as a writer. You're a novelist. You're in the majors. You're in the big leagues. That's how it felt. But it was also it was kind of confusing. I mean, I can't talk about it very well. It was one of those things that comes and it washes over you.
Right.
And you just try to get your head above water. And maybe the worst part of it was that I felt then a lot of pressure writing another novel, trying to follow it up. And it was very difficult to do, very hard for me to do. I took a long time to do it. But I did it, and I'm glad I persevered. I'm glad I kept going, because it gets easier with time. It gets easier when your second book comes out and nobody thinks, oh, he's written a classic. There was a lot of that with the first one. I
loved that novel.
Yeah, I did too. I'm so glad you did. I really have a fond place in my heart for that book. It's called So Brave, Young and
It
Handsome.
is
It's a Western.
beautiful. Buy a copy out from Fairtrade Books.
But it's really excellent when you've had a book that came out and just sort of came out of the blue and made that many friends and sort of broke the sound barrier. It's really good to have a novel that reminds you, no, you're just a human being struggling to put down one good sentence after another. And that, no one was writing to their best friends and telling them, you've got to read this Western. Maybe you were. I didn't hear about anybody who was. And so it was humbling, and humility isn't bad, Humility is not bad.
The reason I asked about the disorientation, in some ways, people with that novel, and maybe with this one too, feel like you are speaking right into their souls in some way, that you know something about them because you know something about yourself, because you know something about the characters that you've created. And it seems like, do they want that level of insight and wisdom in any kind of, meeting with you or experience with you?
There were a lot of moments after Peace Like a River came out when I would receive letters from people who were just baring their souls and sometimes asking for advice, people I didn't know.
Do you remember what people wanted?
They wanted to know how to cope with a situation in their lives, and for some reason they thought I would know, Kerri, and I didn't know. And I felt in some ways like I had a responsibility. Sometimes I answered the letters, sometimes I just couldn't. But I was really cautious about making any kind of, I never gave advice. I would sometimes try to get them to look at their situation a little differently, but I never gave advice. I knew I was not qualified to give advice. It made me really cautious and careful about anything else I would ever write, because I just didn't want to be entrusted with that kind of knowledge. And of course, now I look back and I think, well, they were just people that were reaching out. They were just people that were affected by something that I did, and so they were reaching out in kindness and sometimes desperation. How desperate must you be to write to a novelist? But that, it really did make me realize I was just sort of playing on a different field than I ever expected to be playing on. It really informed me of my shortcomings. I also got a kind of a strange series of letters after that book came out from pastors, usually of small churches in the Midwest and in the South, who told me they liked the book, but they worried because Jeremiah was not properly under the authority of a local pastor.
What did you interpret that to what were they really saying?
Well, yeah, I think what they were really saying is, get yourself to church, boy. Right. I think that's what they were saying. But I actually got a really huge kick out of it. I would read them aloud to Robin, and we would chuckle about it. But no, it was a very strange thing to suddenly be. I've never been. Book fame is not the same as other kinds. It's pretty low key. Most of my neighbors just thought I was on unemployment. But to be sort of known by people that I did not know in return was a very strange experience.
Leif, I think it is the most wonderful thing that people read a book, a work of fiction, and see themselves so indelibly in what you've created that it is not enough to experience the book, that they assume you have reams more of wisdom to share. And I can see why that was overwhelming, but that might happen in someone's life, maybe I don't know, right? 2 or 3 times when a book moves you like that.
Right. Yeah. I think you're right. And I look back and I have a lot of admiration for people who are connecting deeply enough with a book to reach out to its author. I've done that only a handful of times.
I know. Of course I'm curious about if you can think of a book that maybe the first time that you felt like that.
Most of the books that have really swept me away in my life have been books by authors who are long dead. And but I remember being a boy and reading The Wind in the Willows when I was 8, and just thinking, I have to talk to this man. I have to talk to Kenneth Grahame, because that is a book that, I don't know if you remember it, but it begins in the springtime, and Mole is waking up from his hibernation. And he gets up, and he's a little bit fuzzy, and he goes into his kitchen, and he begins cleaning. He's doing his spring cleaning, like any good hibernating animal would do. And then suddenly he hears like a call. He hears the call of something he can't identify, and it's absolutely, it's gripping to him. He has no choice. He starts scrabbling forward. He goes up, up, up. I don't remember if he digs or if he climbs through the stairs. But this is what I remember. The moment that he pops his head above the ground and he sees the meadow and the waving grasses and the sun falls on his face, at that point I was just gone. I wasn't in my room anymore where I had probably been sent. I was in the meadow with Mole, and he goes trotting across the meadow, and he can hear the call of the river. And the river is burbling past, and he meets the water rat, and they climb into the boat, and they have the picnic, and they meet the otter, and the whole thing just absolutely, it was the first time that I'd ever just been carried away. And it's happening to me again as I talk to you about it, because there are stories that have this power to pick you up, and it's like you're just falling back into a river. And I think it's a gift to be affected by a book in that way. But I couldn't reach out to Kenneth Grahame because he was no more. No. What about you, Kerri? What books have inspired that?
I think one of the novels that made me see the world through a different lens was The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. It made me re-examine things I thought I knew, things I thought, well, I believe this, and this is what it is. Yeah. That's also a wonderful thing when a novel says to you, you don't know as much as you think you do, and then
you accept that.
That's right. No, maybe, good point. Yeah.
Did you write to Barbara Kingsolver?
Who's doing the interview here? See how he does? See? No, but I've interviewed her for Talking Volumes. I don't think I shared that story. She's probably heard that like you have 1,000 times.
After I read The World According to Garp, I wrote to John Irving.
Oh my. And?
Of course, I never heard back. But you should have seen the letter, because I was trying so hard to impress him. And I was in my early 20s.
A man who is unimpressible.
Probably, and of course the letter I wrote to him was just absolutely silly, and I was making stuff up. I was trying to be that irresistible young writer that he would want to maybe adopt, and take under his wing, and I'd never heard back. He probably got thousands and thousands of letters exactly like that. But I was one of the chimps in the room hitting a typewriter.
My guess is it would be I've interviewed him. He came for Talking Volumes.
I remember that.
Do you remember that?
I do.
Because, so do I.
I don't remember it badly.
No,
what happened?
it was crazy. All right, but on to other things here. No, but I was going to say, sometimes I wonder, he probably had that experience like you did, the tsunami of experience and reaction and love and appreciation. And it's all you can do to kind of, it sounds like, keep your head above water in some ways. Now I wonder how he looks back and thinks of that.
Yeah, it would be fun to know, wouldn't
Right.
it? It would be so interesting to talk to him about that. At this point, it might be easier to reach out to
It
Mr.
might.
Irving.
I know.
Because remember, I mean, his popularity was such, I never, ever hit that level.
Right. Really?
Not close. No. His was 100-fold more. He was every book of his came out and it would hit the New York Times bestseller list and it would remain there for a long time.
Different time, though.
Yes, a totally different time, but it was a different thing. I remember picking up one of his editions and looking on the back, and it said, John Irving has clearly become the writer for America, of America. And I thought, what does that mean? What does that mean? But that was just a level that I didn't even want.
I know. What would you do with that?
Yeah.
What do you think that means today? Now that you...
That kind of success?
No, that idea that you are speaking for a generation.
Oh, goodness. I don't think it means anything today. I think that's meaningless, a meaningless phrase now.
Yeah.
No one is speaking for everybody, and it's a good thing.
Yeah. Why do you think it's a good thing?
Because we're different people. We're different people. A lot is said about how fractured we are, but that's not all bad. It's too bad that we're at each other's throats, but it's all right to be who you are and not to be spoken for by, some guy out of New England. That's not a bad thing, or some guy from Minnesota.
Right.
Yeah.
You're sounding a little bit like Rainey in the novel.
I aspire to Rainey.
Do you? Let's talk a little bit about the quest that Rainey is on. That is an interesting literary device that goes back.
Oh
my gosh, to the Odyssey and since. And I think this is always creating these quests, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you thought about the arc of the quest. Mm-hmm. But tell me a little bit about how it requires a character to leave the familiar and go into the unknown and challenge, in some ways, everything they thought they knew about themselves as they go into that unknown. What intrigued you about the idea of the quest?
The truth is, and this is going to sound very, flippant. I don't mean it in a flippant way. But when you're going to write a long story and you're going to take a few years doing it, you need to know that you're going to be able to stay interested all the way through. Mm. And so a quest is a natural part of the reason for the development of the quest narrative is that, these storytellers would go from village to village and they had to have something to say. And they needed to have a story to tell that would keep the interest of the people who were gathered around the fire to listen. There's still a lot of that just flat out need to tell a story that will resonate, and everybody looks at themselves as they're growing up and they think, what if I'm not up to this? What if I'm not good enough? What if I don't have what it takes to conquer whatever the problem is that needs conquering in my own life? Because we all have those things. What if I'm not brave enough to fight the dragon or strong enough to slay it? And so the quest is the natural story. It's the Platonic ideal of storytelling, maybe. So with Rainey, it's not even that I set out to make a quest novel, although I soon realized that's what it was going to be. It was that I wanted to tell a story set in my favorite place that would take place in the near future in a world that was a bit messed up. But I'm not a masochist, and I did not want to write just a long parade of bummers. I didn't want it to just be pure dystopia. And so what is the best way to avoid discouragement and keep your own interest up? For me, it is to write a thrilling adventure with kind of a big old love story, an Orphean love story dropped into the middle of it. Look, what's more fun than reading about a couple, and he's good at what he does, and she's great at what she does, and they're cool, and they're like a couple of destiny. And if anyone is going to be the kind of couple that nothing can tear them apart and keep them apart, maybe not even death, that's a story I'll read all day long. And so that's the story I tried to write, and all the dystopian part of it. That's just the bread around the filling, it's just the vehicle. What I really wanted to write was this Orphean love story. And it's nice to wrap in a quest and a chase and a monster. And all of that's in there, and I think it works quite well. But I didn't set out to redefine a quest novel or maybe I brought something new to it. I don't know. I leave that to everybody else. But
So I am interested to hear you say you were a bit of the way in before you realized that there would be a quest.
Yeah.
And Rainey would have to leave all that's familiar.
Yeah.
And he certainly does.
Yes.
Why? Why do you think that? Where were you going when you realized that there was a quest at the heart of this?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not sure I know the answer. The first thing that I wrote that made me realize I had a book, the first scene that I imagined and the first scene that I wrote was the one in the library. In the early pages, Rainey goes to the library, and he's a guy. He's living in Duluth. He's a house painter and a bass player, and he goes to the library not because he wants to check out a book. But because it's cold out and he needs a warm place to eat a cheese sandwich that he has in his pocket. And so while he goes there and he kind of hides in a study carrel, and he hears the voice of a librarian. And she's answering questions at the help desk. She's out of his field of view, but he loves her voice. Her voice is kind of low and sinuous and swirling, and he begins to sort of fall for it. And then he hears her, kind of her insightful approach to dealing with people so that she can tell them which form to fill out. She can tell people how to get the credits they have coming to them, but she also intuits what they need, and so she recommends things. She recommends, novels for the lonely, poetry for the heartbroken, history for the ambitious. She knows what people need. She's like an Ann Tyler character in that way, I think. And he begins to fall in love with her before he has ever seen her. And then what really got me was this, that Rainey does not know what is about to happen to him, which is, he thinks, if I'm to have any chance with this woman, I've got to do some reading. So he starts to just make notes on a piece of paper about the books that she recommends to other people, and he just goes and he checks them all out, and he reads. And he falls in love with it. It sweeps him away. It's like that Ratty and Mole thing we were talking about earlier, and he falls into the act of reading, and it does that thing, that transformative thing that books can do that almost nothing else except maybe music is capable of, at least for me. And then I knew, I think that's the moment. I think that's the moment at which I understood, oh no, this is just the beginning of him stepping foot into the unknown. Wow. This is when it became a quest. I'm glad you asked that question because I didn't know the answer before.
You've kind of led us to the excerpt, which a little sooner than planned, but that's okay.
Sure.
Because there is this wonderful passage where we start to really understand how determined Rainey is to impress and win Lark. and the acquisition of knowledge that it's going to take to win her.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what else would you want to say about this scene?
I will say that Brainy grew up in a household of non-readers. He admits early on, he says, I could read but seldom did. His parents, ahead of their time, had no use for books. The story is set in a future a few decades from now where literacy itself is quite under attack. There is a proudly illiterate President of the United States. There is booksellers are constantly kind of under threat, and it's a dangerous time to fall in love with reading. But this is what happens. So, just before this excerpt, he has been listening. Like I said, you're right. I did lead us right up to this. He's been listening to Lark make recommendations. And he can't keep up with her. So in desperation, I acquired a notepad and ballpoint and expanded my use of the library to actual books. Dickens turned out a hard go. Twist, no. The beatings go on and on, but I stuck with it. Next writer on my scrappy list was this woman, Connor, whose people were confused and malformed and placed in the world as if by the god of cruelty. I could hardly bear those stories. Yet linked together, they became a rope ladder you climbed with knees and elbows out of whatever dragged you down. After this, I seemed to enter a zone of madness. It's a blur now and was then. I couldn't afford not to work, so to sustain the madness, I worked badly, falling into books, while latex congealed on my brushes and rollers. Not everything caught, but some did. I loved the crazy fight where Beowulf goes hammer and tongs with Grendel in the longhouse, gripping the monster's arm like the world's first clamp, and finally tearing it off, hairy shoulder included, and hanging it in the rafters to drip. Holy smokes! I was taken in too by the long boat ride of Odysseus, with its 1,000 interruptions, Circe with her ominous pig yard, what had to be an invigorating layover with Calypso, and the startling wit of the Cyclops announcing a nice surprise for Odysseus, but then guess what it was? You shall be eaten last. Well, come on, painting jobs thinned into the distance as these stories swallowed whole afternoons, a dazed reader wrapped in stormy light cast by Lake Superior that raging autumn when the sun got lost for 7 weeks straight in a rack of permanent clouds. I banged and barged through dozens and hundreds of books discovered in my eavesdropping sessions, not just adventures, but also poetry, sweet Jesus, by Greeks and Brits and Japanese whose silky names I never can remember. Did I understand it? Not by half. But when it thunders, you know your chest is shaking. These thieves and lovers and wandering poets, what big lives they had. I began watching everyone I met for secret greatness. I read about vanished glaciers in books of scorned science, then a monograph by the raging climatologist Holloway, who predicted Lake Superior would shortly warm enough to yield bodies that had lain on the seafloor for centuries. The navigators, cooks, and ancient braves, the unlucky swimmers of antiquity, and sure enough, Holloway hadn't been gone a decade before these dead began coming ashore, washing up in the shallows, waxy and gaping in their period clothes, frightening children on the beaches, and once tripping up a fleet of racing yachts as they foiled to an upwind mark. After Odin traded an eye for knowledge, I had 8 days of sympathetic response where my own left eye went dark. Recalling the poet gone blind in his zeal, I considered taking a breather, but by then was deep in the tale of a minotaur who falls for an American waitress. I couldn't bear the suspense. Would they find happiness together? I bent down to the pages with my solo eyeball blinking constantly to keep from drying out. Reaching the end, I discovered I still had both eyes after all. They both worked fine, and in fact were full of tears.
Because I believe in a love like that. I believe in a love that lasts beyond the confines of time and space. I believe I have known your face, so how can a heart forget her past? I believe in a love that lasts beyond the confines of time and space. I believe in a resting place. Whoa. Breathe in love. Let your heartbeat be enough. Breathe in love. Let your heartbeat be enough. Breathe in joy, breathe in hope, whatever it is you need. Just breathe and know your heartbeat is more than enough. We are worthy of love. We are worthy of love, love, love. Yes, I believe in a love like that.
Anna Lou Woods. Thank you. I'm Kerri Miller. You're listening to a special Summertime Talking Volumes. We're at the Sheldon Theater in Red Wing with writer Leif Enger, and his new book is titled I Cheerfully Refuse. So I'm curious about, you mentioned this is kind of a dystopian, futuristic time setting, and I wondered kind of where is it between, I don't know, the zombie apocalypse and The Handmaid's Tale? I mean, where do we fall on this timeline?
Well, I don't know, because I think that most dystopian fiction, and I love a good dystopian story, I do, most of it is set into motion by something that is beyond people's control. And I think that this does not do that. This is the kind of dystopian future that it is possible to just sort of sleepwalk into. This is the kind of dystopia where you wake up one morning and realize that, a tiny handful of people own everything, the entire economy, where indentured servitude has made a giant comeback, where justice is dispensed on bridges by religious zealots. And none of that seems all that unlikely to me. And so rather than set it into motion with an asteroid strike or a nuclear war, I just thought, well, suppose that we look outward 3 or 4 or 5 decades, or in some cases like 15 minutes, and imagine how things might be if we don't pay attention.
What is it that you love about a good dystopian novel?
I think it's that there's something exciting. There's something exciting about imagine everything just going to hell suddenly. I'm not saying it's great, right? I'm not advocating for it, to be clear. But there is something exciting about it in the same way that, Stephen King wrote some time ago that what he likes to do is set up his characters with a happy life for 200 pages and then throw them into hell and see what happens. And I think that we all have this sense of, uncertainty about the future. And in some ways, maybe it's helpful to think about how things could go really wrong so that you can imagine how you would cope, or imagine a way out of it, a way to slay the dragon, even if it's only by adjusting your philosophy and trying to do whatever is the next right thing. You can't always slay the dragon by yourself, but I don't know. There's something really gripping to me about a dystopian story that pits normal people against really abnormal circumstances.
I was interviewing a historian the other day, and we were talking about this idea that when we look back at history, it all seems inevitable.
Right.
That this event would happen and this event would happen.
Of course that would happen.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's so difficult in the moment to understand that but for. And he told a story about, almost a missile being fired from Russia to the United States because one man slipped coming up. Just the tiniest little thing.
Yeah.
That's why I find dystopian novels pretty sinister and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I don't relish that idea.
You don't.
No.
Don't you find something that is like a silver line? Like for me, writing this book, I almost didn't want to finish because I loved how the natural world was reclaiming itself. I loved how Lake Superior, now that in the future story here, Lake Superior is once again the very frightening frontier that it must have been before there was satellite navigation, because most satellites for navigation have been disabled through attrition or through enemy attack or whatever it might be. They're not working reliably at all, and so ships are just going down. Ships don't want to go to Lake Superior anymore. There's not much shipping because there's not much navigation. But I found that there was something so lovely about the idea that Lake Superior is once again the local deity in this region, like it always was before the modern age. I found that to be incredibly appealing, and I kind of hated to come back to the normal world.
That's such a great description, Leif, the local deity, because you do have I think it's being described on the book jack as a sentient Lake Superior, but I saw, it reminded me in some ways of when you go to Greece and you hear about those gods, and you find out that there was smoke from the Oracle of Delphi because there was a sulfur pool, but people attributed all of these qualities and wisdom. And in some ways, that's what I think is happening to Lake Superior.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I don't want any confusion. Lake Superior is a geographical feature. It's a big lake, and it has an effect on everybody around it in the same way that a mountain range has an effect. I know people who live near the mountains who feel the same way about it as Duluthians tend to feel about Lake Superior, or an active volcano. For a very dramatic example, watch what's happening in Iceland, and it's like, oh my gosh, why am I not there? It's so exciting, and most of the time, Lake Superior just feels like an enormous lake. But sometimes, when the wind picks up, then it's a burning bush. Then it's something magical. Then it's the Oracle of Delphi. It's all that, and so. The great thing about writing fiction is that you can acknowledge the first part of that and yet still really be informed by the second part of it, which is important.
You moved to Duluth, you and Robin moved to Duluth in, did you say 2018?
2018, yeah.
So, I mean, obviously you'd been to the lake before.
Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering, as I hear you describe this, if you would have seen all the dimension in that lake for your fiction, had you not put yourself in the kind of proximity that you're in.
Oh, no, I don't think I could have imagined it. I couldn't have imagined it. But many years ago, I was invited to go sailing for a week on Superior with my brother-in-law and a friend of his. And we spent a week in the Apostle Islands. And the Apostles, if you've seen them, are this beautiful small island chain off of Bayfield, Wisconsin. And if you get beyond the Apostles, then it's the big lake, and it feels like the ocean, especially if you're not familiar with big water at all. And I was a young man, and I just thought, this is crazy. This is prehistoric. Someday I'm going to write a story about this, but I never felt equipped to do so until Robin and I had. We bought a big old boat and we sailed out of the Apostle Islands ourselves for 15 summers. And so we were out on the water a lot. And we were out in the big part of the lake a lot. And we got caught in some wind. And you start to understand, oh, this is when it kicks up. Yes, it's still a physical body of water. It's still just geography. It's the natural world, but it feels like it's after you. It feels like it wants your bones, and it's going to do everything it can to get them. That's how it feels, and it's also at the same time so unbelievably alluring that you never want it to end. Yeah. So that I felt after a few summers on Superior that maybe I could write a story that would be convincing.
That's so I didn't know that the seeds of this were planted in that earlier sailing experience.
Yeah.
What do you think you know about this body of water that, exudes a kind of, I think, fearsome mystery for people?
Yeah.
What do you think you understand about it that someone like me, I've been to the shores, I've never been as close to it, on top of it, as you are?
I don't know that I understand a lot more about it. Maybe it's that it never ceases to be mysterious. You realize if you do a little bit of reading that there are 10,000 people at the bottom of Lake Superior.
I mean, that was creepy and weird.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, 10,000. They figure, I mean, if you figure in everybody from all the shipwrecks, there are a lot of people who have ended up down there. Are they going to start rising with global warming? I don't know. But if you have that idea and you're a novelist and you don't use it, there's something the matter with you. Apparently the human body begins to the microbes begin to produce gas when you reach about 39 degrees and warmer. The bottom of Lake Superior right now is 38 degrees.
Huh.
So I mean, it stands to reason, right?
We know who to come to when it starts to happen, when the zombie apocalypse, that is the literal zombie apocalypse right there.
I did get a note from a reader who said they were very disappointed that the corpses that rose did not come back to life.
Really?
They wanted it to be that kind of a book, and I thought, man, that didn't even occur to me, but
it's pretty good.
It's not the worst idea.
So Rainey set sail on Lake Superior because, I hope I'm not spoiling that. People know that Lark is gone, right? Can we say that?
Yeah, we can say that.
Right.
Let's not worry about it, Kerri.
He has this sense that Rainey has this sense that he might encounter her again in these islands. And I have to say that when I realized that Rainey was going to be in grief because Lark was going to be killed, I was like, no, do not kill Lark, my favorite character.
God, mine too. I mean,
How did you make a decision like that?
I'll be honest with you. It stopped me in the manuscript for about 4 days. I just couldn't get beyond
Wow.
it because I had started to write her, and the more time you spend with somebody like that, the more you love them. And it's just like getting to know an actual person, like down the street. I'm not going to kill anybody I just met. And here's Lark, and she's just this. She's adorable. She's a
Right.
wonderful character.
She is.
And I just put everything that I love about human beings into this person. And of course she has her flaws. Ron Charles maybe it wasn't Ron Charles. Some critics said, well, this, Lark she's a little too good to be true. And I thought, wait a minute. You forget who's telling the story. Rainey is telling the story, and
Right.
Rainey's in love with her.
Right.
He's in love with her. Of course he's going to tell the story as honestly as he can, and that is how he sees her. I love how good she is, and how creative and how forgiving. What a delight she is. So when it came to the inevitable, and look, without that event, you have a novella.
And no quest.
Yeah, right. No
Right.
quest. But of course, the same thing kind of happens if you read the Orpheus myth. They're happy. They're happy. And in order for Orpheus to be that name that we all know, we have to know what he does. What does he do? After his wife is taken from him, he picks up his instrument and he goes to the gates of hell and he plays his way in. He goes to the underworld, charms the god in charge of it, and looks for the shade of Eurydice. And he almost makes it. I mean, he almost does. He finds the ghost. I won't wreck it for you if you don't know the story. Read the Orpheus mythology. It's fantastic. But once I realized, no, I have to do this, then I did it in as clean and mournful a way as I possibly could. I figure if you're going to drag people into that, if you're going to ask them to accompany you on this difficult journey, you owe it to them to at least do it in a way that is as beautiful as you can make it. That's what I tried to do.
I'm curious about what happens you said it stopped you for 4 days of writing. Were you, in those moments, re-examining decisions you'd made about where this story was going?
Oh,
Were you,
absolutely.
yes?
Yeah, I was. I was
What
trying.
does that sound like?
It sounds like despair, because I had this idea in my mind. By now, it was a quest story in my mind, and I knew what it would require. And so I asked myself, well, okay, can I bring her in? Can I have him try to get her back? Can she appear as a ghost in the Slate Islands like he imagines that she will? I made a stab at that. I made a stab at not killing her at all.
I wondered.
I did. But I couldn't make it work. And the thing is, when you're onto something and it's working, you don't dare deviate. I mean, if it's moving, when a flame is lit, move toward it. And the flame was lit, and I had to keep going. And eventually, here's when it became all right. There's a very difficult passage between the time of Lark's and the midsection of the book, when there's another character named Sol who comes aboard, and she is a little girl, a 9-year-old girl that he meets on the shore of Michigan, and I didn't see that this was going to happen, but when Sol appeared, and I knew there was going to be a child, then I felt almost like I was getting Lark back. I felt like I was getting the beginning of Lark. I was getting the spirit of Lark, and the spirit of Lark seemed to return to the story, and and to my mind as I was working. But there's a very hard 100 pages where he is just under pursuit.
Right.
And he's having many a close call in the lake. The sea just keeps bailing him out and bailing him out. And he comes to love it. He comes to believe that it is sentient and that it sees him and that it's on his side. And then this child appears. And the moment that happened, I knew I could finish the book. I was halfway through, and I felt strongly that the spirit of Lark would inform the rest of the story, and it does, I think.
Did the spirit of Lark have to be personified in a child? Because you've just said you knew that a child would appear.
I don't know that it had to be personified in a child, but a lot of this book is about our prospects going into an uncertain future. And I needed there to be some children. I needed there to be a child who would be a product of the age that is illiterate and kind of feral, kind of savage, untamed. And I knew that she would be like fishing on the shore with a spear, trying to fend for herself. I knew that she would be living with someone who was hard and an abuser, and she is, and she needs someone to help her get out of that situation, and it turns out to be Rainey. I wanted there to be a child in order to demonstrate that the future can be hopeful. And the fact that this illiterate child needs exactly what Rainey has to give, that made me feel really hopeful. It made me feel optimistic. People find out a book is dystopian and they're like, man, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can handle it. And I understand that completely. And yet what I got from the book as I worked on it was a sense of optimism and a sense of renewed hope. That's what it did for me.
And this is an observation maybe that will fit what you just said. I loved the metaphor of Rainey's grief over the loss of Lark, being that he sets sail, he thinks, for these islands because, and he's struggling to map it in his mind. And I think that's what grief feels like, that your brain keeps trying to place that person back into their place, and there's science behind this, and you can't, and then you keep having the realization that your brain can't map them because they aren't there. And you do this again and again to work through grief.
Yeah. I think that Rainey, he wants so badly to regain what he has lost. I don't think that he understands that he can't have exactly that again until he's actually washed off his boat in the storm. And
is that the moment?
That's the moment for me and the fact that he is able to catch the rope and to climb back aboard. He's back aboard, but he's aboard now in a different world. He's aboard in a world where he knows that he is not going to see Lark again. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there's a little bit, in the mythology, there's various mythological stories. There's always that underworld moment where the hero on the quest disappears, vanishes, goes underground, sometimes literally and sometimes metaphorically. And they have to die in a way. And I think that is Rainey's death, is when he is swept over. He's engulfed by the waves. He slowly and painstakingly climbs his way back aboard the boat. And then in the morning, when he washes up on the Michigan shore, his boat Flower washes up on the Michigan shore, then he meets the girl, and everything changes.
You've written a book within a book in some ways.
Yeah.
What an undertaking.
Are you talking about I Cheerfully Refuse, the Molly Thorne book within a book, or are you talking about this other kind of Orpheus quest mythology.
I'm talking about her last name is Thorne, first name?
Molly Thorne.
Molly.
Yeah.
I'm talking about how that propels. It also sets kind of the, what I think of as kind of the moral compass of the
Yes.
novel.
Yeah.
And yet there's a lot of detail about what that book encompasses.
Yeah.
So I thought of it as a book within a
It
book in
is.
some ways.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It also, I think, helps to set the stage for what the world has become.
Right.
Because the story of this book, I Cheerfully Refuse, is a sort of a rumor. The book was never published. A couple hundred advanced reader copies were published. And Lark, who is a bookseller, has spent her life looking for an advanced reader copy of I Cheerfully Refuse by her hero, the poet and eremite Molly Thorne. A book that we hear described as a kind of a hymn to the future, a promise or vow to creatures not yet conceived. In other words, a refusal of despair and a refusal to give in, a refusal to bow to the wickednesses of the age. And when things kind of go belly up for the publishing industry, this was a book that was on the docket. And so it's this collector's item. It's what everybody who cares about books would like to see. I'm not sure what you want me to say about that, because I mean it's a book that really matters to Lark, and because of that, it really matters to Rainey. And when he goes to sea, he ends up going with Lark's copy of I Cheerfully Refuse, and he ends up reading to Soul from it.
I mean, I guess I just want to say, Leif, it is, I think it's as meaningful and as beautiful, that book, as the rest of the book that surrounds it. Do you know what I'm saying? It's
Yes.
It's such a nice fit.
Yeah, and it's a nice fit, and it's a good device, and I've thought a lot about that book. I think I have.
You've thought a lot about I Cheerfully Refuse?
I have.
The book, not the novel.
Not the novel. The book within the book, and about Molly Thorne herself.
Okay.
Who I think has had. I've spent many years thinking about that character.
Really?
And she lived an interesting life.
Is there more to be known about her?
Not yet. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so one last excerpt here.
Yes.
And this one unfolds as Soul, who we've mentioned a few times. This is Rainey's young passenger, wants to be read to sleep. What else do you want to say about this?
Oh, yeah. So Soul doesn't really trust text. She doesn't trust words on a page. She has no idea how it all works. It's a mystery to her, and she's not all that intrigued by it. But what she can't get enough of is being read to. This is brand new to her. She's never had anyone tell her stories or read her stories. And so she wants to be read to, and they're on the boat, and he sends her down to get one. Down the hatch she popped, and of course came back with Molly Thorne. How could she not? All the other books were field guides to clouds and shorelines and animal tracks, whereas Molly's book had a drawing on the cover of a small girl peeking through her fingers at the reader. And here's the excerpt from that book. 5 years old and fed up to here, I rolled a sleeve of saltines, a Nesbitt's orange, and 2 of my brother's crumbly cigarettes into a woolen blanket and waited for my chance to slip out. That is the first sentence of her opening chapter, entitled, I Run Away. I'd attempted the book several times before, but in those silent readings, the words arrived in Lark's voice and swamped me with grief. It was different reading aloud to a tiny, rapt human, Molly told her life as if she were that moment, dreaming it into existence and stamping her feet to see where it would go. Earlier that day, I'd asked my valiant dad about death, which in pictures was a robed wanderer with carven cheeks and skeleton feet, so fearsome. And on this topic, he was not reassuring, but then Dad himself had mysteries by the handful. Didn't he calm the wild dog who raged and snapped at others? Didn't he survive the tornado that sucked him into the sky with tree limbs and street signs? And so, while I had no doubt death was real, neither did I doubt that Dad, who often chuckled in his sleep, had in his possession a way to get around it. Right, Soul said in a skeptical tone, a way to get around death. Well, she was 5, I pointed out. She didn't have your advanced years. Maybe we give her the benefit of the doubt. She made no reply, so I kept reading. Off trots Molly to a narrow green river where she spots an ancient stone arrowhead on the bank. She wants the arrowhead, but a few yards from it stands a stranger looking out over the water. When he turns, she sees that the stranger is Death, with a tailed black coat in place of a robe and soft-soled boots instead of skeleton feet, but otherwise Death, right down to the cheekbones. That set Soul up. There follows a page or so of genuine suspense, Death easing closer to Molly line by line until she thwarts him by demanding he answer a perplexing riddle taught to her by her atypical father. Wait, Soul said, that wouldn't work. What? A riddle. Come on, what riddle is going to keep Death away? You didn't like it? It was a silly, irreverent riddle I thought Soul would enjoy. It was all about fingers and nostrils. I just don't think Death cares if you're funny, she added, because I kept laughing at the riddle. Well, maybe he used to care, I said. It's an old story.
There's a freedom deep in my bones, pulling me close, calling me home. And when I open, that's where I go. I'm finding my way back to my soul. I am coming home. There's a doorway in the back of my mind. It gets hard to find until I let go. And then I open, and that's how I grow. I'm finding my way back to my soul. I am coming home. There's an ocean vast as the sky, somewhere in light, beyond space and time. And when I open, that's where I go. I'm finding my way back to my soul. I am coming home. And when the night falls and the earth turns cold, when I lose my way, I remember that, oh, to be broken makes me whole. It frees my spirit, brings depth to my soul. I am coming home. And when the dawn breaks over that mountain, I feel the sun's warmth and remember its call to be open to the mystery, to follow my spirit, that destiny. I home. We're already home.
Hannah Lou Woods. Hannah, what a perfect song for our conversation. What's the story?
Yes, so that song is called Hymn for an Awakening Soul. I actually wrote it while I was doing the laundry, the most ordinary thing, but I felt the most extraordinary beauty at the same time. I was looking at the mountains. I was living in New Mexico at that time, and I was seeing the sun and the beauty of just being present to this beautiful moment. And I started humming this song, and that's what came through.
Oh my
that's
gosh,
kind of the story.
Couldn't be more perfect for our conversation. Thank you very much. Thank you. We're going to raise the lights in the theater, and we're going to open it up for some Q&A. Does everybody hear the thunder and the rumbles out there? So I don't want everybody to get drenched. So what time is it? Oh, we've got a little bit of time, but... if you have a question for Leif, just raise your hand. And Kelly and Tom, where are you? Up there? Okay, I don't see him. Oh, there he is. Okay, we'll come over with the mic. So I see a question right there in the middle. Yay.
Thank you for this. It's been a great conversation. I'm curious, Leif, if you had the entire arc of the story in mind when you started, or did that develop as you wrote?
That's a great question. I'm not much for outlining. What I had was 4 or 5 sort of pivotal scenes that I thought were going to happen that would drive the action forward. And so I just wrote toward those. Wow, I love that sound.
I know.
It's fantastic. We're in an ancient theater and the thunder is rolling. But no, I just wrote toward each of those pivotal scenes, and you know, one thing that you learn when you've been doing it a long time is how long you can prolong a section before a little spin is required, where the action needs to go in a slightly different direction, and so. What you try to do, or what I try to do, is know what's going to set it off, what's going to turn the compass a little bit. But thank you for asking.
Do you feel like you come to the page with, I don't know, a lot more confidence than you did, let's say, when you sat down to write Peace Like a River?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's just.
And how does that carry you through, maybe in the tougher times, tougher moments?
Well, there are always moments when you say, this isn't working out. This isn't going as well as I thought it would. But just the confidence of having finished a few books before, it makes you see, no, you have to get the pages down. You have to hit your word count. You have to be disciplined about it, or at least I do. I know that there are writers who can just binge and spill out, 50 pages in a week. I've never been able to do that, but I am good at being a worker. And for me, that's just the discipline of writing every day, and then going back over the previous day's work and making it cleaner, and then doing that same thing the next day and the next and the next. And it's like anything else. If you've done it a number of times, you start to know that you can. Yeah.
Question right up there. Tom, where are you? Okay.
We have one up here.
Hi.
Over here, your stage left. Hey, it's me. I had a question. I'm just curious. So you talked a lot about how stories have inspired you and make you, and Kerri, you said this as well, change your perspective of the world after you read the story.
Yeah.
Do you also find that when you write a story, do you feel that your perspective is inspired or changed after writing it?
Oh, absolutely. And that's a marvelous question. I think what keeps me writing is that that has become the main way that I try to figure out what I think about the world. I usually grapple with something pretty large in every book that is a question I have. Whether it's, a question of sort of cognitive dissonance, how can this be true if that is true? How can this be true if something like that is happening? If I write a character who is in the grip of some situation that has a bearing on that, then I can at least, I can't usually solve a problem, but I can usually make it so I'm at peace with the problem. I can go from thinking that, no, it's this way or it's that way, to realizing, actually, many things can be true at one time. I was in my 40s before I knew that. How is this possible? But no, for me, it's just been a great way to work through things. I heard an interview with Richard Linklater, the terrific movie director, who was talking with the New York Times, and he said, when it comes to artists, we all find the therapy for the condition that we suffer from. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. I would add that, at least in my case, and I suspect in Richard's, it's also a lot of fun. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I do it just to be a wiser person or a better person. I do it because nothing gives me this kind of joy. Nothing makes me feel more satisfied than sitting down with, like, maybe a big wordy scene that I wrote the day before and spending a day or two more on it and transforming it into a much shorter but more beautiful scene. One that has some power, one that has some horsepower, that has some punch. That makes me feel like I'm doing what I should be doing. And I always learn from that process.
Question right back there with Kelly.
Hello. I have a special grandfather who was, like many men of his generation, was a fan of the Zane Grey novels.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was really excited when you mentioned how common they were to find on a bookshelf, I think in So Brave, Young and Handsome.
Yeah.
And they're not as common to find on the bookshelf anymore. And so I'm wondering, are you a fan? And if you are, what would you recommend me looking for to understand why my grandpa liked those so much?
Are you talking about Zane Grey in particular?
Yes.
Yeah. I haven't read Zane now in a few years, but I grew up reading those wonderful Zane Grey westerns, Riders of the Purple Sage, the famous one, but then many others. Wilderness Trek, I read a number of times when I was in junior high and high school because it was just, it felt like, oh man, I'm reading an adult novel. I'm reading this novel with lots and lots of words in it and not lots of pages, and very exciting things were happening throughout. I love westerns even though I don't read them very often now. But I would say if you're a fan of those, by all means read some Louis L'Amour. Look, these are pulpy westerns that adhere to a formula for the most part. But it's a very winning formula, and it's usually some version of the quest. There's usually, they're filled with stereotypes, but they're also, I mean, if you grew up the way I did, which was in the early 60s in west central Minnesota, in a town that always felt to me like it was 20 years behind everywhere else, then there's something really comforting about the westerns. I felt like I was growing up in a time that was older than it really was. And so the westerns felt kind of homey to me. I mean, when we went out to visit grandparents in North Dakota when I was a kid, there were westerns all over the place. Both my grandfathers read westerns, and these books were just in the air. I guess maybe they're not in the air anymore. I don't know. But there are more modern westerns too, and they led me naturally into the westerns of like Larry McMurtry, not just the Lonesome Dove series, but his terrific Billy the Kid novel, Anything for Billy, without which I never would have even thought of writing the western I wrote. So Brave, Young and Handsome owes a lot to that book. I think it's still a very valid form, and I love a lot of the archetypes that are available to us in westerns. I didn't answer your question very well at all.
Well, this may help. Not for you or for your grandfather. For you?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a newish genre of feminist Westerns, and I am a huge fan of them. And I've got a couple titles. Maybe Leif will read a couple of these.
Maybe I will.
One of them is called Outlawed by Anna North. Fantastic. And I just read this great novel by Claudia Ravens, and I can't think of the name of it, but very contemporary, big spin on the traditional Western, but all the stuff that we love about Westerns. I've just become a huge fan, so good question. Okay, couple more. Yes, Tom, hi. Up there on the balcony.
So speaking of genres, your books are all quite different from each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's fascinating. Do you see that there's a common thread running throughout your the books you've written, the 4 books you've written, not the ones you and your brother wrote?
Yeah. I think there's a common thread. I mean, if I could describe it in a few words, I would say that I think they maybe all feel in some ways written by the same person, partly because I've written all of them in first person, in the first person voice. So they have a narrator from beginning to end. I've never written a book that jumped around between different points of view, although I think that's a really elegant construction, and I would like to do it sometime. But I would say that if there's a common thread, it's that my narrators tend, I think that they started out to be, look, when I wrote Peace Like a River, I was in my 30s, and I was raising kids and writing news stories, and there were a lot of things about the world that made me kind of nervous. And so I think I was looking for a kind of certainty, maybe a philosophical certainty, something to hold on to, a stay against confusion. And I think that book really reflects that, and I think that everything I've done since has been just a function of time and experience, and of getting to know a lot of different kinds of people, and of abandoning the idea that there was a way to live and I knew it, and I was living it. I had to leave that behind. And I think the result has been that my books have become broader and maybe more interesting. At least they are to me. But I think that all of the narrators tend to sound, maybe this is self-indictment, but I think they all sound a little bit the same because they're all coming through me. They're all different people. They all have different lives and different situations, but they're all coming through me. So I think I'm the common filter. And so they tend to be, I think, a little naive, a little wide-eyed. I think they tend to be optimistic. They tend to expect the best or hope for it. Maybe that's the common thread.
Another question right over there.
First of all, I just want to thank you. This is a stunningly beautiful book, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I'm a terrible reader, and I couldn't put it down, and since finishing it, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it.
Wow.
Well, that's the best thing anyone could say. Thank you.
It's very true. But here's my question. There are characters in this book that do terrible things.
Yeah.
And yet, by the time I finished the book, I didn't feel like you had dismissed any of them who had done the worst things. You didn't throw them away as just they're terrible and evil. And I'm just really curious about I'd just like to hear you talk about that, please.
That's such a cool observation, and a generous one. What I've found is that when I write about a character, especially one that is going to do some bad things, and I have an inkling of what those things are, the more I write about them, the more I come to kind of like them. It's exactly like when you meet someone and you think, oh, I've got nothing in common with this person. How can I exit this conversation? You start looking around, for the doors. And this happens occasionally. You meet someone, you just don't have but but then if you listen to them for like 7 or 8 minutes, it doesn't take very long. Almost every time, not every time, I will say, but almost every time, you find yourself kind of coming around, kind of saying, well, this is sort of an interesting dude. This is kind of he's got an interesting story. And suddenly you're no longer in the position of kind of judging him harshly. You begin to understand him a little bit, and then most of the time you start to kind of like him. And I find that with fictional characters, it's the same. If I take the time to write some scenes that maybe don't end up in the book, and sometimes I'll just spend some pages, just spend some hours, just interrogating the characters, just asking about the stories and see if they have a voice. And if they have a voice and they can tell me their story, then I can't treat them harshly. I'm unable to do it. I can dislike them immensely, and yet still kind of love them, if that makes any sense. And so, characters like Warwick, who's a very, very bad man, and duplicitous and wicked in many ways, and who has managed to pull off the feat of trading sleep for revenge. He hasn't slept in over 40 years. I love this. There's something mythological about that, isn't there? It's
Yes,
like, no, I want my revenge on this person, so I will trade anything for it. How about sleep? Done. So he hasn't slept in all this time. But I found that I loved writing about them, and I loved thinking about them, and I still kind of miss them. I'm haunted by Warwick. Thank you for asking that question.
A couple of notes here. Leif is going to sign books,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. And we're announcing our new Talking Volume season soon, in early July. I'd love to see all of you in St. Paul on one of those nights. But in the meantime, thank you so much for the warm welcome to Red Wing. It's just been a pleasure to be here. And it's nice to have met you and had you in the audience. So, and our thanks to Leif. Is the book signing out there? Book signing is out in the front of the theater?
Yeah.
I think? All
Yeah.
right.
Sounds
He'll
good.
see you out there in just a couple minutes.
All right.